Crime and Crime Again is a true crime podcast containing subject matter that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. This episode discusses topics that may be triggering, including domestic abuse and violence, substance abuse, and suicide. Please take care of yourselves, and know that it's okay to skip this episode. Born on February 12, 1993, Courtney Michelle Lake, along with her younger brother Colin, grew up in St. Lawrence, which is a small town that sits on the southern coast of the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Their parents eventually separated, and Courtney chose to move to St. John's with her mother, just under 4 hours away from St. Lawrence. More specifically, they lived in Mount Pearl, about 10 minutes away from the main metro area of St. John's. As a child, Courtney was lively and rambunctious, with a vibrant sense of humor. She and her mother shared a close bond, and Courtney loved to play little jokes on her mom and make people laugh. She was always outgoing and social and generally had a wide circle of friends. Courtney was incredibly close to all of her family. There were frequent family dinners and events, and holidays were always a special occasion. Christmas was an especially important event in Courtney's family, and throughout her entire life, she had a particular fondness for everything Christmas related. Some of her most precious belongings were her Christmas ornaments and decorations, all of which were her favorite colors, purple and silver. As a teenager, Courtney started entering into a pattern of unhealthy and tumultuous relationships. Along with that, she's described as having dealt with her own personal struggles over the years that had an effect on her behavior. As an adult, Courtney struggled with drug addiction. And as we know, addiction is an immensely difficult battle to get out of. When Courtney was 17 years old, she gave birth to a baby boy. Courtney and her son's father, Jason, had a 4-year relationship that ultimately ended, with Jason getting sole custody of their son. Despite this, Courtney and Jason did eventually start working to put their differences aside, and they made a huge effort to have a successful co-parenting relationship. Courtney was a dedicated mother. Both she and Jason attended all of their son's events, swimming lessons, t-ball, anything he did, both of his parents were there. Although Jason had full custody, Courtney saw her son frequently, and when they weren't together, they had regular FaceTime calls. She and Jason truly wanted their son to have a good relationship with both of them, whether they were together or not. So fast forward a little bit. In June 2017, Courtney was in the process of leaving an extremely toxic and violent relationship with a man named Philip Smith. They had met and started talking online. Philip was an Army reservist who seemed to have his life together. He had his own house, a good job, and he even owned a motorcycle. Courtney was taken with him. Her mother, Lisa, however, was not fond of Philip. She has described him as arrogant and rude, and she's also noted that Philip didn't seem to like the fact that Courtney had a son. Things between Courtney and Philip moved pretty quickly. Early in their relationship, Courtney would stay in his house while he was away for work for weeks at a time, and they spent a lot of time together when he was in town. But just as quickly as things progressed between them, things became toxic. Very early into the relationship, Lisa would receive calls from Courtney, panicking and asking her mom to come get her from Philip's house. In mid-April 2017, Courtney was in Philip's truck as they were driving down the road at about 45 miles per hour when the two got into a heated argument. Courtney was trying desperately to escape the vehicle when Philip punched her in her stomach and her arm, and he ended up pushing Courtney out of the moving vehicle. The incident resulted in a nasty baseball-sized bump on Courtney's head and a cut on her bottom lip. After it happened, Courtney called her mom from a hospital around 1 a.m. Lisa rushed to the hospital, and when she saw her daughter, she immediately called the authorities, which in Newfoundland is the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. From here on, I'll just refer to them as the RNC. Philip was arrested, but only sentenced to 2 days' time served. There was also a no-contact order put in place to prevent him from trying to contact Courtney or Lisa. On top of that, Lisa filed a peace bond against Philip, which stated that he could not go within a certain distance from her house. But none of the arrests or charges filed kept Courtney and Philip away from each other. And this is the cycle of domestic abuse. Abusers utilize many different tactics to manipulate, gaslight, and coerce their victims into coming back. Many abusers use threats of violence, whether against themselves or their victims, to manipulate their victims into staying in the relationship. While physical violence may often lead someone to try to leave their abuser, it's the psychological abuse that manipulates and scares them into staying. Courtney's battle with addiction was another way that Philip would manipulate her into coming back to him. He would often tell her that he had drugs, and she would fall right back into the cycle with him. Just days after Philip attacked Courtney in his truck, he actually called Lisa, threatening that he was going to take his own life. Lisa ended up talking him down, and she called his sister to notify her of what was going on. The RNC was called again, and when they arrived, Philip was attempting to harm himself, but they stopped him and took him into custody. By May 2017, Courtney had broken things off with Philip, and she was making every effort to ensure that it was permanent this time. She had also begun recovery from addiction. She started seeing someone new, and when Philip found out, he set out to humiliate and manipulate her. Philip found Courtney's new boyfriend on Facebook, and he messaged him private, intimate photos of Courtney that she had not given him consent to distribute. Not only that, but Philip also distributed the images to people in Courtney's family. When Courtney was alerted to this, she immediately reported it to the RNC, but nothing seemed to be deterring Philip, and his harassment continued. On June 5th, 2017, Philip called both Lisa's cell phone and home phone 33 times. Courtney had blocked his number, so he resorted to calling her mother. And again, Courtney called the authorities. They arrived at the house to take Courtney's statement, and while they were there, Philip actually knocked on the door. When the officer opened the door and Philip told him who he was promptly arrested. 2 days later, on June 7, 2017, Courtney went with her son and his father, Jason, to go to her son's swimming lesson. Around 5 p.m., Jason dropped her off at her mom's house, and her son went home with his dad. That day, Lisa and her husband had been out at a barbecue, and around 7 p.m., they called Courtney to ask if she wanted them to bring home some leftovers. She excitedly told them that she was starving and that she would love some food. And that was the last time that Lisa talked to her daughter. Meanwhile, that same afternoon, Philip had appeared in court around 3 p.m. for the charges of assault, harassment, and distributing pornographic images. He was basically given a slap on the wrist. The judge apparently took some sort of pity on him and even stated that he didn't have a record and he had served as an Army reservist. So he was only sentenced to 2 days' time served, along with probation. Along with that, the judge made Philip promise not to try to contact Courtney and took Philip for his word. And with that, Philip was released. He only spent 2 days in jail for his absolute torment of Courtney. When Lisa arrived home around 9:30 p.m. on June 7, 2017, Courtney was nowhere to be found. Instantly, Lisa felt that something was wrong. Despite her fears, she waited to see if Courtney would text or call as she usually did, and she tried calling her, but Courtney's phone started going straight to voicemail. The next day, June 8th, Lisa contacted the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary to report her daughter missing. Initially, the RNC was hesitant to take the report, but Lisa pushed, and the report was filed. Courtney's entire family immediately jumped into action. They started hanging flyers around town and searching for signs of Courtney on their own. Soon, as more people learned of Courtney's disappearance, volunteers came forward to help search for her, even taking their ATVs out to wooded areas to search for any sign of the missing mother. But nothing was found. There was no sign of Courtney or anything that could lead to her whereabouts. Courtney's case quickly made headlines around Newfoundland, and the RNC encouraged people in the area of Mount Pearl to check their home security cameras and even their dash cams for any signs of Courtney in the area. Someone soon came forward and offered the RNC footage from their home security camera. The footage showed Courtney at 7:52 p.m. on June 7, 2017, walking just down the street from where she lived. Within a few days, more footage surfaced. On June 7th, around the time that Courtney disappeared, there was a city bus in the area that was running ahead of schedule. When it arrived at a stop near Courtney's house, the bus paused for a few minutes, and the dash cam captured something vital. The footage showed Courtney walking along the sidewalk at 7:54 p.m. on June 7th, when a black pickup truck pulled up, and she got into the passenger seat. As soon as the door closed, the truck whipped around in a U-turn and sped away. That black pickup truck was traced back to Philip Smith. The RNC quickly converged on Philip's house, and the media captured footage of boxes being removed from his house, as well as a tow truck taking Philip's black pickup. Philip was arrested and searches for Courtney continued, but still, nothing else was found in connection with her disappearance, and Philip was not talking. On June 30th, 2017, 23 days after Courtney was last seen, the RNC publicly announced that they were no longer investigating her case as a disappearance, but as a homicide. They stated that they would not provide any further details to indicate what exactly led them to this conclusion. Philip was eventually released from jail again in August 2017. Over the next few months, Courtney's family continued their efforts with putting up flyers and even billboards, hoping to generate leads in Courtney's case. Her disappearance remained a huge topic of discussion across Newfoundland. As far as progress in Courtney's case, there was only silence until November 1st, 2017. The RNC were called out to a cabin in a wooded area of Bellevue Beach, about an hour west of St. John's where Courtney lived. The cabin was owned by Philip Smith's father. Upon arrival, the RNC found Philip Smith. He had taken his own life. There was hope that Courtney would be found at that cabin, but after a 2-day search, there was still no sign of her. Soon after his death, the RNC announced that Philip Smith was the only suspect in the murder of Courtney Lake. Now, 5 years after she was last seen, Courtney has still not been found. Courtney's family continues to put up new flyers around the area where she was last seen, and there are still billboards across Newfoundland featuring her picture and contact information for the authorities. Honestly, Courtney's case reflects a giant failure in the system, a failure that we see time and time again. It takes so much strength and courage to even come forward and report your abuser, and Courtney did that. Philip was arrested numerous times for his harassment and assault of Courtney, and he was let go with a slap on the wrist. Courtney did everything that she was supposed to, and the system failed her. If Philip Smith had been kept in jail where he belonged after everything he did to torment Courtney, she would be here today. But like many, many other women, Courtney was let down by a system that does not care, a system that does not protect women. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, I will have a few links in the show notes that can guide you to resources and assist you in getting help or even getting out if you're ready. Please know that it is not your fault, and you are not alone. Courtney Lake was 24 years old when she disappeared, and her son was only 6 years old when he last saw his mother. If you have any information regarding the disappearance and murder of Courtney Lake, please call the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary at 709-729-8000 or call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. All sources for this episode will be listed in the show notes. If you'd like to request a case for me to cover, you can find the link to the case request form in the show notes as well. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at CrimeAgainPod, on Instagram at CrimeAgainPodcast, and on TikTok at CrimeAgainPodcast. Links to other pages like YouTube, Patreon, and Good Pods can also be found in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.